can see it when you look out your window or when you turn on your television. You can feel it when you go to work, at church, when you pay your taxes. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth. What truth? That you are a slave. Like everyone else, you were born into bondage, born into a prison.
I bring to you the return of Mr. and Mrs. Smith.
This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill. The story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill. You stay in Wonderland. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Hey, everybody.
Hello, folks. Good to have you back again. And this is another episode of The Return of Mr. and Mrs. Smith.
Sad news, though.
I know.
This is the last, as of right now, show of Mr. and Mrs. Smith. We're taking an indefinite hiatus after today.
Yes, we need a bit of a sabbatical because we have some other projects on the table that need our aggressive attention to make them work. Which means we're holding the staff at gunpoint right now. So anyway, no, the things that we're referring to is this, and you've heard us talk about them before. It's just now they've blossomed and grown, and things are starting to come into fruition. We've mentioned we started our own paranormal, UFO, and educational streaming channel on Roku, Fringe TV, under the Fringe TV network. And we are extremely happy with the content we're building up on there. And this is a word we're putting out to everybody who would like to have their own, create their own content, create their own show. We would love to have you on there as a content provider. And we're also always looking for advertisers to get their advertising spots on there as well. But this is something that is going to go up against, in a big way, against a combination of, let's say, History Channel, Discovery Channel, Gaia TV, Netflix, and be a combination of all that together. But our main drive is being a premier educational and paranormal program, henceforth the name Fringe TV, which was inspired by the phrase border science. So, so that's one thing. The other thing is, of course, we're gearing up for the Human Origins Conference, HOC 2021, which is going to be held as a virtual event, March 26th, 27th, and 28th. You can visit humanoriginsconference.com and get your tickets there. I would say hurry up because we have a limited amount of tickets left there, and they're only $150, right? Or 50. They're only 50. Yeah. I don't know why I keep saying one.
I don't either.
They're only $50, and it's 3 full days with 16 speakers. Okay, so please go there and get your tickets now, and that's why they're going fast, because we have them at the ideal price. We also have launched the Human Origins Foundation as the umbrella nonprofit organization, which, of course, right now the conference is the flagship project, but it will also be opening up to tours to ancient sites and sacred sites, as well as other educational seminars and programs and webinars as well. Okay. We thank everyone for their support on these projects and the support on the return of Mr. and Mrs. Smith. We've been going at this since March earlier this year.
Quite fast.
And it's gone quite fast with quite a number of shows that have mounted up right away with excellent guests. And our webpage is still there, radio.ufoteacher.com. That's not going anywhere. And so is the YouTube channel. So you can catch up on all of the previous episodes of the show there too. We think it's great that we get to, before we go on sabbatical for a little while, we get to wrap up the radio show series with 2 very awesome guests today. And We have Philip Mantle and Ron Kinsella with us today, author and illustrator of a brand new book. And it is actually quite phenomenal what they've done here, because this seems to be going in conjunction with the trend I see today with these kind of children's oriented books out there. So what we're talking about today is the brand new book they came out with recently, Introducing UFOs, A Young Person's Guide. Philip Mantle authored it, and it was illustrated with some really awesome images and illustrations by Ronald Kinsella. And you might see it up on your screen right now as you're watching the show, but you guys have to get this. The aspect, talking about the authors themselves here, Ronald Kinsella, illustrator, artist, and author himself. He's written numerous books, including science fiction for the mainstream media, some of which are illustrated by himself. He also jointly hosts a paranormal radio show, Twin Souls, along with his identical twin brother, which is part of this global network. He has also appeared on national television. He lives in Kempston in Bedfordshire. And our author here is Philip Mantle, who we are also just as happy to have both of these gentlemen on the show. Philip is a longstanding UFO researcher and author from the United Kingdom. He was formerly the Director of Investigations for the British UFO Research Association and the MUFON representative for England. He is the founder of Flying Disc Press, where you can see many other books on there, because he's got a couple other books that are releasing this month and next month as well. You should check them out also. And he lives in, is that Pontefract, West Yorkshire? Yeah. In any case, we welcome both of them to the show. It's great to have you both here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, good evening.
Philip, this is what, your 8th book now?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, I've not counted them. I mean, I know a while back I did some little children's booklets as well some years ago, so you can put them on the list as well. And I do have copies of them somewhere, but don't ask me where. But yeah. But I've published a lot more as well, so not just an author. Under Flying Disc Press banner, we've published a number of works from people around the world, and we are expanding. We now have Flying Disc Press in France.
Nice.
So some of our books are in the French language. We have Flying Disc Press Ibo America, which is Latin America. So our books are getting translated into Spanish, and we have good working relationships with other publishers in different parts of the world. Our books, for example, have been published in German. We had the first one out in Russian, and there are a few more waiting. If it wasn't for the pandemic, we'd have them in Russian already by now. So, and Portuguese, and I think there's a Romanian or two thrown in there for good luck, you know. And so it's we're excited. As you mentioned, we've got some new publications coming. Ronald will have his own publication, his own book out next year, along with his twin brother Philip, both separate books. I can't tell the difference between them when either I see them or speak to them.
Me neither. I'm glad you said that.
No, there is no way. It's just not possible. And it wouldn't surprise me if we haven't got Philip tonight. Ronald might be in the back room having a glass of wine, you know.
He's standing in for me, Philip. He's standing in for me. We've done that before.
I'm sure you've spent a lifetime messing with people, you and your brother. I have a question for both of you. I know that, Philip, you have been a long-time researcher. When did that start, and what made you get into UFO research? Did you have any experiences yourself?
I mean, I've always been interested in all things paranormal, Linda. I mean, going way back when I was a young boy, my mum, God bless her, she was originally from Northern Ireland. And when she was young, it was quite a rural place where they lived, literally. I mean, her walk to school on a morning was 5 miles.
Oh, my God.
Wow.
So that's why she didn't go so often. But it's true. And they lived on a small, I call it a small farm, you know. And she told me the story of when she was a young girl. She used to go and play by the stream or the river, and she met a fairy, a little female fairy, complete with pretty clothes and wings, and she talked to it, you know. And this fairy gave her a little bottle to drink out of, and said, "If you drink this, you'll never have an accident."
Oh.
So my mum said she drank it, and so she told me this story, you know, when I was a young boy, and I questioned her about it down the years, and I said, you know, look, Mum, you know, story true? Was it real? She says, well, it was real to me, so, you know. And then I had 2 children myself, so she told her grandchildren the same story. And so I always had an interest in all things paranormal. And the UFOs came up in my sort of teenage years. Mm-hmm. And when I was at high school, I got very interested. When I left high school, not really knowing what I want to do, the film Close Encounters came out. Mm-hmm. And it was late 1978 over into 1979. I did some work in West Germany. And when I came home, I lived about 5 miles from the city of Leeds in West Yorkshire. Leeds has an evening newspaper called the Yorkshire Post, still published today. But my aunt, who lived round the corner, knew of my interest in this subject. So she brought me this copy of the newspaper, and it had an advertisement in it for a meeting of the Yorkshire UFO Society coming that Sunday. So I got on the bus and off I went, and hey presto, about 20 or 30 other people there, and I joined the Yorkshire UFO Society, and that's how it all began.
Interesting. I love the fact that your mom had an experience with a fairy.
Yeah, I mean, when I was about 13 or 14, literally across the road from where I lived was my best friend's grandmother. And she used to go to the Spiritualist church. So I went to the Spiritualist church with her a few times. So I was always fascinated in all things paranormal, but UFOs took a hold in my late teens, if you like.
Ronald, what about you? What got you into this whole experience? Was it an experience yourself that got you into this whole UFO arena?
It was indeed, yes. It was an incident that happened in 1982. I made the mistake because when you're young, you don't record or catalogue anything. And especially when something like this happened, firstly with my grandmother and us, seeing something. And then secondly, with as I refer to them as the doctors, but they weren't doctors, they were anything but. Mm-hmm. But that's what forced me later on, because at the time the subject was taboo, let's be honest. It was considered, you couldn't talk about it. And even the mediums of the time, I think when I was a kid, our leading medium was Doris Stokes. You couldn't talk about the incident. It was just ridiculed beyond belief. And Philip Mantle, being a vintage UFO researcher himself, I'm not a researcher. I'm more curious for answers, and Philip Mantle has assisted and helped me and mentored me and my brother. He's been a marvelous source of encouragement and inspiration. So it's people like Philip Mantle who have given me the confidence to come out with the encounter, as well as looking at the subject rather hopefully like Sherlock Holmes, methods of deduction, if you can call it that. It's ironic, my grandfather, he was a lovely man, although he was very, very analytical, but he did have an open mind, and he was the one who got me into Sherlock Holmes. I was watching Doctor Who, and yes, you're imaginative. You're a kid. You're going to love Doctor Who anyway. All kids did. Mm-hmm. But he said, you need to stop watching Doctor Who, or you need Sherlock Holmes. So he bought me books then, my grandfather, and I actually love them. But one thing that's very interesting about Sherlock Holmes was his methods of deduction.
Oh, yeah.
I know they're based in the 1800s, the books, but when you actually look at the methods of deduction, they actually come in handy. So but in answer to your question, the incident that occurred, which was horrifying for me, a 13-year-old, later on spurred me because you've been down the rabbit hole, as you yourselves have. You're curious. You want to know what happened, although it's going to be very vague, but you can start digging. And it's people like Philip Mantle, God bless him, who has inspired me and put me on the right path with people and encouraged me to look at this subject from a very rational point of view.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting you should bring up Sherlock Holmes, because it was a friend of mine who got me hooked on the original stories from Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and so I read the whole anthology, and I love the one debate. I forget which adventure it was, but there was a debate between him and Dr. Watson about what the definition of, what's a good person versus what's a bad person, or what's an evil person. And Sherlock is like, Watson, if you were to fly over the rooftops of the local neighborhood and look in on what's going on with everyday people, you would see the worst horrors taking place. And these are the people you would think are good everyday citizens.
Yes.
So
that was when he was in the train and they were going the country, and
yes.
said to him, that's so lovely. And he said, all I see is murder and skullduggery. So,
yeah.
So, Philip, I know you've been doing this for a long time. I see that one of the names of your books is Without Consent, The Full Facts, UFO Case Files of Russia, Danger Zones, X Creatures. What made you go from that to a children's book?
Yes, I mean, introducing UFOs, a young person's guide, is a project I've had on the back burner for quite some time. I've got well, they're not children anymore, but my children grew up around this subject, not interested in it. They laugh at Dad even today. But colleagues and I of a certain, as Ronald described me, of a certain vintage, we often talked about, who's the next generation of UFO researchers. And of course, it's the high school students of today. They are the next politicians, the next engineers, they're the next of everything. And we said, is there anything that we've got that we could say, well, have a look at this. If you're interested in this subject, maybe this will help you along the way. Not a be all and end all, but And so the idea of a book aimed specifically at a teenage high school sort of audience was in my mind, and I wrote bits of it some years back. But then I've suffered with various health problems, and it was put on the back burner.
Oh, okay.
But then came the lockdown, so I've got no excuse anymore. The projects that have been pending, they were. I mean, I still have an old-fashioned filing cabinet next to me, an old metal thing. That they were crawling out of the filing cabinet saying, please finish me, please finish me. One of which was introducing UFOs. The idea behind it is that we go through the subject decade by decade, pick out 3 cases, some of which are very well known, others not so well known, others that perhaps, have fallen off the ufological treadmill and have forgotten about. And it's not an encyclopedia, because I think the last thing a teenage audience wants is some huge, great book that they've got to read. It's not overly text dominant. It's got a nice balance, I think, of text and photographs. And then, of course, I knew Ronald, or Philip, whichever he may be. But, I knew Ronald and knew of his artwork. Now, Ronald has a particular style, with his artwork, as a lot of artists do, of course. Yeah. And I just thought, what I would like at the beginning of each chapter is you take the first case, whichever one it is, and we have a nice piece of artwork to introduce it. Perhaps that will capture a teenager's imagination and will draw them in and think, wow, that looks cool. They're not meant to be exact replicas of what happened, because you can't do that, as Ronald will explain to you. But it was, it was left to use his own imagination in the hope that a teenager would think that's great. What else is there? So that's the way it all came about. And in tandem with that, colleagues like me and of our age group have also accumulated a lot of case files down the years, most of which are still on paper. And we've decided, this sort of goes hand in hand. We don't want to lose these when we're no longer involved or we've passed away. Because I know of several colleagues who when they passed away, their life's work ended up in the dumpster.
Oh, yeah.
Which is a tragedy. So these two things go hand in glove. We'll preserve the files somewhere so they are publicly accessible. I mean, a friend of ours by the name of John Hanson is an ex-police detective. I think John has been rescuing files from around the UK and has accumulated, I believe, 500,000 pieces of paperwork.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
That's files, ephemera, newspaper cuttings. That's not counting his books and magazines that he has as well. And I think John's got to the stage now that he's overwhelmed somewhat. But a lot of these are old UFO sightings, from whichever group or whichever researcher. And he's done an amazing job. So I think the two things run in tandem. One is preserve the files for future generations, but also if you're a young kid sat in high school now and you think this is great, I love this subject. If you go on Google and just punch in UFOs, yes, there'll be something that comes to the top of the search engine, but it doesn't necessarily make it the best, does it?
Right.
It's just the most popular. Now, I'm not saying our book is the best or is better than anyone else's. What I'm saying is it's got my 40 plus years of research thinking about how to angle it for that particular audience. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I know when I was a teenager, I hated being told what to do and what to think. And this book does not do that. For example, when I was young, if I got a book, first thing I would do was look on the back cover to tell me what the damn book was about.
Yes.
And then flick through it. Any photographs, any pictures. So I decided with this book, we'd have a UFO photo file right in the center of it. And I contacted colleagues in different parts of the world, asked them what UFO photographs they thought were genuine. So, some that you'll recognize, but there's others even I hadn't seen, from Russia, from around places around Europe, from Turkey. I'd never seen them because I'd never asked my colleagues for them before. That's the only reason. But there's a little mini introduction to that UFO photo file, and it says, make up your own mind. So we're telling the audience, we're not here to indoctrinate you. Here's some photographs that we think may well be authentic, however you decide for yourself. Same when it comes to the theories of what UFOs may or may not be. We round it off with 3 theories, but there are many more, of course. And it's up for the individuals to make up their own mind again. We use the extraterrestrial idea, or we'd say, are they perhaps some super secret military vehicles of some nature, or is it some kind of rare natural phenomena that scientists haven't caught up with yet, or is it something else? You go, all the information you need is there at your fingertips. This is just a little way to kickstart you, to get you moving. And like I said, it's a shame with the paperback. The paperback's in large format. It's 8 by 10, and purely for commercial reasons, we can't print it in color because all of Ronald's illustrations are in full color and they look amazing. However, we've also made it available to download, so it's in Kindle and all that lot, which is all full color. Nice. So hopefully Ronald's illustrations have done the job as well. I think he's done an amazing job.
So go ahead.
I was going to say, this, everything, things happening for a reason. This is probably a very timely moment to get the book out there because I mentioned earlier, this seems to be part of a new trend out there because I've seen this happening with the Infinite Voice Project and Official First Contact here in the United States too, where there have been a series of children's books put out, with
no, please, no more.
But no, I'm glad you guys did that. And
I like that it's going towards teenagers too.
But just to let people know how significant it is what Philip Mantle and Ronald Kinsella have done here. It's a children's super book of UFOs illustrated book that got me started. I wrote. I have to show you this, and I was able to track this down ages later on Amazon, and I got it. It's called the Super Book of UFOs. It came out in 1978, and it's got some great illustrations in there too. Okay, and that book inspired me. That was 1978. Okay, so I'm about 7 or 8 years old when that book came out. In 1981, that was the book that inspired me to write my first book report on UFOs in school.
Hey, amazing.
So that's the power of a children's book on UFOs and alien contact. That's where it started for me at that age. And 1981, I was turning 11 years old, and on the what happened with that was, being that it's a generational phenomena, that was the first visible moment between myself, my brother, and my mother coming home from my grandmother's house, where we had our first UFO experience. And the thing followed us all the way home across town from my grandmother's house to my home. And it stopped with us at the stoplight, and then when the light turned green, it followed us again. It waited for us, and it was going through the sky, watching us all the way. So, and this all coincide with that first children's book here.
It shows you we may be on the right track.
Yes.
Because if it can do it in one generation, it surely can do it on other. Teenagers are no different now than we were. They just have more technology.
Exactly. And I wish that I had a book when I was younger, when my sister and I first started having experiences in the late 60s. Nothing was ever mentioned. It was a secret between me and my sister. It wasn't until 1994, 95 that my mom started showing an interest and going to a book club, again, books, where she started bringing home Zechariah Sitchin and all these books that were out at the time. And that's when my sister and I finally told her what had been happening with my sister and I when we were younger. If I had a book like yours or like the one Rick just showed, it might have been an easier way of explaining to my mom what was happening.
Well, I remember as a young man reading Eric von Daniken's Chariots of the Gods, and I thought it was absolutely amazing, and was astounded many years later to actually meet him at a UFO conference that I was speaking at, and so was he, and actually have dinner with him in the evening. And it was great. It was a lovely man, and that was in Vienna in Austria. But I remember we were looking through my school library. There was no books on this subject. I found one in my local library. I can't remember the name of it now, but I already had the interest. And when I went, the strange thing is when I went to work in Germany, I couldn't speak the language, so I couldn't sit down and watch the TV or pick up a book. So I asked my mum to send me some books to read. And she did send me a box of books, and they were all about UFOs. I don't know where she got them from. They were all paperbacks. So that just intensified my wanting to get involved in this. And of course, no sooner had I returned from Germany that my aunt brought the newspaper, and there's the advert for the first ever meeting of the Yorkshire UFO Society, which I attended, and it was organised by two brothers, Graham and Mark Birdsall. Sadly, Graham's no longer with us. Mark's still around. Graham went on many years later to publish a hugely successful magazine, simply called UFO Magazine, right. And it was his life's work, and we had some amazing. I learned an awful lot from them, but that's how it all began. Quite by chance, but like I said, I would love to have had a book like this myself, and that's that is part of the thinking behind it as well. Teenagers aren't that much different today, if any different. And if you're sat in class or you're at home bored silly, and you want to get involved in this subject, well, maybe this might just be that will just give you that first rung of the ladder, if you like.
Right.
And like Ronald will tell you, we haven't pulled any punches in the book. I was wondering whether to miss out the sort of close encounter stuff, but we've put Betty and Barney Hill's abduction in there, and Travis Walton's, and another one from Scotland that nobody will have heard of, from Fife in Scotland. So, and we've got a nice spread of things from around the world. And like I said, Ronald, tell them how the illustrations came about. We had a free hand there.
Yes, Philip gave me the run of the mill very kindly. He knew what kind of style he was looking for. And it was very interesting. I was very excited, especially with Betty and Barney, because I've already seen the illustrations by the brilliant artists who've done representations of the aliens. And I thought, well, I'll try and do them a little bit different because, as you probably all aware, they do have a unique look about them. Their eyes are very wide apart. And it was interesting with Kathleen Mardin stating that the original people who documented this probably thought that the aliens were wearing hats, but she's more inclined to believe that they had headgear on like these.
Yeah.
And they were perhaps mistaken. It can't be proved, of course. Kathleen doesn't know for sure, but I would think that was a very appropriate suggestion on her behalf. But I wanted to encapsulate a degree of darkness with that one, because I thought to have Barney being dragged behind Betty on the way out of the saucer or the ship, the flying saucer. It wasn't really a flying saucer, it was more like a pancake-shaped thing, but I gave it the emphasis sort of a saucer because I suppose that's what it would look like. But I loved that story, to read the document of Betty and Barney, which did happen, absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt that occurred. And the fact that they were of such sound-minded people, very respected members of their community. I mean, Barney, and Betty. And but I loved doing the artwork for that because Philip gave me free range to do, the aliens. I made them, as you will probably notice, a little bit like the Greys, but I suppose they were. I mean, when you look at the present descriptions of them, they do sort of match them. But the actual testimony I've heard on tape of Barney when he was screaming was quite chilling. So this wasn't, and even then, you see, this is the whole point, and the people tried to cover it up. And Betty and Barney were reluctant to come out with this, but they were pushed to actually release this story, as you all know. But very, very haunting, and I found it especially interesting for the book that Philip included a degree of the close encounters, like Travis Walton, as well. I mean. That was quite haunting. Although the movie they made of it was very disturbing. The encounters that happened to him wasn't that horrifying, although it was for him. But for us in Hollywood, seeing them like that, I remembered walking out of that film absolutely horrified, absolutely terrified, because Hollywood had souped them up to something so disgracefully horrific. But the images in the book have been applied for the younger audience. And so, this book is the kind of book I wished I had when I was younger. It's what you were discussing with Philip earlier. In our library we had no books on UFOs. The school library we had no books. You only had to go to the Luton library outside the Arndale Central. Then they did have some, but there wasn't a wide range of them. You see, because even in the early 80s, they were very, very rare. I mean, they did do a magazine. I think it was it called The Unexplained, Philip? They did a magazine to run. Yes. I mean, I didn't even have that, and because I didn't even speak of my own encounter with anyone, the teachers seemed to know there was one that was magnetized to Philip and myself. His name was Mr. Charles, and he was very posh, and he wore a tweed jacket, and he had a pipe he smoked. But he gave Philip and I this. They had them bound in. They came with binds when you reach a certain point in the collection. Well, he gave us them for our summer holiday and said, "Read them," which I did. And even then, after that, I couldn't read them. But the book Philip has written is this kind of thing I wished I'd had, because the unexplained, the trouble with them was they were brilliant, but there was too many. There was too many encounters. For a kid of my age, it was overwhelming. So Philip's book is quite beautifully done because it's just enough to capture your interest. You see what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
Beautifully illustrated. I think his photographs in there are wonderful as well. And also the fact that he asks the reader to make up their own mind. So it's not preachy. I mean, it's not preachy. I've read some books, some UFO books, which have been all matter-of-factly by authors. I won't mention their names, but they seem to have all the answers when we don't.
Right.
I'm ordering the book as we speak.
Oh, thank you. That's lovely.
Thank you very much. Thank you. But no, I mean, Ronald's correct there. I mean, down the years, I've lectured at a number of high schools. So, I've listened to the audience that we're aiming this publication at. And, these young people, perhaps, in my opinion anyway, ask better questions than many of the adults. So, some of those questions were still ringing in my ears all these years later. And I'm trying to give them not a definitive answer, but if not a partial answer to their inquiries. And I've lectured at colleges and things like that as well. So that was the idea behind it. And of course, it's in 8 by 10 inches. Is the book? So it's got multiple purposes. You can swat somebody around the head with it, or swat the fly, or stick it under the leg of a wobbly table. It's uses. There's no end to the uses for this book. There really isn't. But I'm not going to say it just because he's here, but I really did appreciate Ronald's illustrations, because I wasn't bad at art at school, but I'm not in Ronald's league. So I appreciate the artwork, and I think it speaks for itself. So the idea of it is you can pick that book up and you can flick through it, and there'll be either a photograph or a piece of artwork or something that will hopefully grab your attention. And if you're just setting out on this subject, then hopefully it will grab your attention and allow you to move forward in whatever way you like. For example, in the book, one of the, it's not a case, it's a thing called Project Hessdalen is featured. Hessdalen is a valley in central Norway. It is surrounded by 3 mountains, which I could not pronounce the names of, even if you threatened me with a gun. It's just not possible. There's only a couple of hundred people live there. But in the early 1980s, the local residents started seeing these strange lights down below the mountaintops, especially in the winter, because in the summer, they don't get much darkness. Mm-hmm. And they knew that there was no roads there. There was no snow scooters or anything like that. So eventually, the UFO groups of Norway and Sweden became involved, and they literally set up camp in the Hessdalen Valley in the winter with sub-zero temperatures, way down to minus 20 and more. And they borrowed equipment. They had radar, they had a lot of camera equipment, and they managed to photograph these strange lights. Oh. And of course, eventually, the late Dr. Alan Hynek even visited Hessdalen. I'll give you an idea of how cold it is. He stayed with a friend of mine who drove him up to Hessdalen, and on the way up there, the car froze.
Oh, wow.
And literally came to a stop. Luckily, they found a house nearby and they got something to get it going again. That's how cold it was. Wow. And I went some years after Dr. Hynek, and this is a true story, where my friend lives. I think it's about a 14 or 18-hour drive. It's a long drive because Norway is a long, thin country. So the first step on the journey was to call at his local gas station to fill up with petrol, with gas. So he does that, and then he opens all the doors on the car, and it's been snowing, it's very cold. And he opens the trunk, and he's got a little metal thing with a sponge on the end, and he's going round all the edges of the doors and the trunk. And I'm thinking, what's he doing? So he gets in the car, we shut the doors. I said, what are you doing? He said, I have to put that round the edge of the doors so the doors don't freeze.
Oh, okay.
Wow.
Yeah, yes.
And I'm thinking, oh boy, where are we going? You know? And we got there. We didn't. The car didn't freeze. There was plenty of snow, and I always remember we're driving up to the area, and there was a lot of snow. And every now and again at the side of the road, you see a pole sticking out of the snow. And I'm trying to figure out why you have these poles. There's no lights on them or anything. So I had to ask him in the end. And he says, that's so when it really does snow, you can actually, the snow plow can find where the road is.
Oh, okay. Yes.
Yeah. And of course, I'm thinking, oh boy. So we spent a couple of nights in Hessdalen, and we didn't see the lights, but I've been there. But the thing is, now the project continued. Bearing in mind, to begin with, it was in a caravan, with a borrowed radar off an old boat. Now there is a permanent scientific installation that monitors the area 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You can log on to the Project Hessdalen website and follow it on the webcam. And they've even now got the phenomena caught on camera, on digital. So, and the local high schools, the students visit there in the summer, not in the winter, and the project head is a chap called Erling Strand, and he tells them what happens. He also teaches this in the high schools as well. So that all started from the local inhabitants of this quite remote little location that you would drive past in the summer. There's nothing there, It all began with that, and it's ended up as a full scientific station. That's what ufology can do. So Project Hessdalen is featured in introducing UFOs. So even if you want to approach it from a pure scientific way, there's an example of what can be done.
Wow.
And it was UFO researchers that started it. Alan Hynek, when he was there, he called it the UFO laboratory, and he managed to see the lights. And I think it was his last field trip before he died. I think the following year he passed away. But there's been, big scientific studies done there. They don't know what these lights are caused by or whatever. And very peculiar. But that's featured in the book. So it's not just all about, aliens and abductions and wow, and zing, bang. There's that bit of course science in it as well. Because there will be youngsters there that, are fascinated by science. They've got access to science today that we could have only have dreamed of when we were kids.
Yes.
But they can use it like the guys at Project Hessdalen have done. And it's amazing what they've achieved. So next time somebody said, well, ufology's never done anything, just point them in the direction of Project Hessdalen. That's what they did, and that's just one example. And it's in a book for the next generation as well.
Did you guys want to show some examples from the book about the style of the art?
I was just going to ask that. You just stop it. Get out of my head. I'm very curious to see your artwork, Ron.
Thank you. I mean, the thing I will say about that, and I'm very honored that people have expressed their interest in it. I mean, I will be very honest with you. When I finish a piece of work, I'm very critical. I had the pleasure and honor, the absolute honor of getting in contact with Boris Vallejo and Julie Bell many years ago. They're two of the leading fantasy and sci-fi artists.
Boris Vallejo and
Julie Bell, absolutely first-class artists. And me, a humble novice, I wrote to them. And lo and behold, I got a response back from them. They are lovely. And they've encouraged me to a degree. And they have also encouraged me with because I'll say to a degree, because I don't wish to flag myself with esteemed titles. I'm not like that. I have no ego to bruise at all. I have no ego. They were wonderful, and they even endorsed one of our children's books, which was lovely of them both. But I was inspired by them when I was younger, but I could never draw like them. It was very difficult. But I developed my skills. It was very slow. I'm a slow learner, but once I've got it, I've got it. And what is interesting about the art is that when I was painting pictures using acrylics, never oils, but acrylics mostly, I'm colorblind. So, yeah, so this will make you laugh, I hope. I was asked to do a horse for someone, and I did this horse. And this is where the benefits of digital technology come in, which I slapped down. I was asked to paint this horse, and my greens and browns, I can't tell. It depends on the shade, like the blues and greens. I painted a green horse.
Well,
it was green. And
it's an alien horse.
I had no idea. And when I presented it to the person who wanted it, they said, "Well, that's amazing. That's the first green horse I've ever seen."
Hey,
So-
it would be good if you were doing it for Dr. Zeus. So, but
It is. They call it a handicap. So I'm not one to give up with anything. But when this digital technology presented itself in the form of tablets and the studios, I was first hesitant because I used to say, and this is a slap in the face for me, that digital artwork is cheating. I tell everyone, very aloof, I say, no, it's cheating. Imagine the slap in the face I had when I actually went for it and how it's anything but cheating. I had to relearn the whole art. And the good thing about this, with the color blindness, is the fact it has a set color wheel. So your color, so I know where the browns are, I know where the greens are. It's absolutely amazing. So yes, so I'm very honored that people have expressed interest in the artwork. And there is something I now use, which has helped me enormously. It's called ZBrush or ZBrush. It's basically a sculpting software for monsters, aliens and ships. Is rather like plasticine. You can play with it and do what you want with it. And the good thing is it's clean. And if you make a mistake, you can push a button and go back. So it's absolutely, so this digital age, as Philip was saying about all this technology, has actually been an absolute blessing in some ways for us. So that's very kind of you to stress about the images. And also with the flying saucers or the ships that are done, I can have control of lighting. There's an interesting aspect of this, is that the man who made Sir Ridley Scott, I believe, the brilliant Alien film, well, basically, this is something I also learned about technique of illusion, is that it was so incredible, but it was all to do with lighting. It was a man in a rubber suit, coaxed with some gel, but that's all it was. But it was his lighting that brought it to life, the way he did the lighting. So now I have control myself to a degree of lighting to try and bring the pictures to life. It's hard, and it's always difficult for me when I'm trying to come up with something, like a gray, but when it works, you feel like $1 million.
Yes.
awesome.
Do you have?
Well, now I know why Ronald stopped playing snooker and pool.
That's right. Yes. Oh. Well, my grandfather was colorblind as well, so I think we've inherited it from him genetically. So, yes, I never did play that, Philip, actually.
Were you going to say something?
No, go ahead. What were you going to say?
I was just going to ask if it would be too much to ask to see a sample of what you drew for Betty and Barney Hill.
I don't know how to I can't put it on this system because I've got my brothers, but I can't do it on this system. I'm afraid I don't know. I'm not. Although this is amazing. Although I'm brilliant with the know-how of getting it together and all that, making it work, the Cintiq. I'm absolute rubbish at trying to send files or presenting them.
If you have a copy of the book, you just and go ahead and hold up the book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it there?
And
I can get it. Give me a moment.
Can you open it up, Philip, to the picture of Betty and Barney Hill that he drew?
Yeah, should be able to.
I'm very curious about that.
I have to go and get the book. It's upstairs.
That's all right.
Philip
It's all
has
right,
it
Ron.
right here.
I've got it.
Oh, Philip's got it. Philip, oh, thank you.
I keep one permanently here. Then I can refer to it. So I don't know how well you can see it from there.
Oh, wow.
Oh, look at that. Okay.
Wow.
Nice.
That's the Betty and Barney Hill one. But bearing in mind this is in black and white.
I know, but I like that.
Yeah.
The when you get the digital download, if you get an ebook, it's in color.
Okay. Okay.
And it's only the printing cost that stopped us from publishing it in color. It's nothing else. It would almost treble the costs.
Oh, I know.
Again, there's a multiple of reasons for using the Betty and Barney Hill case. One, because it is significant in UFO history. It wasn't the first encounter of its kind, but it was the first one to go public in that respect.
Right. Yes.
But plus the fact it's a mixed race couple, so certainly in the 1960s, they had a lot more to lose than they did to gain by going public with a story about this. It would have been bad enough if they were both white, but of course, Betty being white and Barney being a black man, they were taking an awful big risk. But I think, certainly in their neighborhood, they were well known and well appreciated. So there was no racialist backlash as far as I'm aware, but it was certainly a risk. And this is the kind of emphasis we put on, not just encounter cases, but UFO cases in general. Certainly the Alien Abduction Club is the one club that nobody wants to be a member of. It really isn't. And a lot of people, not so much today, although the stigma is still there, but certainly in those days, the stigma attached to this subject was enormous. And I know Ronald mentioned Travis Walton case in 1970, was it 76? I mean, I was actually hired here in England to help promote the movie Fire in the Sky. And one of the things I did in London was put on an evening presentation by Travis Walton and Mike Rogers. So that was the first time I got to meet Travis. And he told us the story behind why the film isn't entirely accurate and all that lot. But it was funny because I had to attend a lot of the press screenings of the film. So it was press only. And I gave a little talk at the beginning of it, handing out some leaflets. By the time I'd finished all this, I could narrate Fire in the Sky, the dialogue to it almost backwards. I'd seen it that many times, And of course, I went on to meet Travis in America and in Rome. I met him at a huge conference in Rome, literally. And we were on the stage together. And he had jet lag. And in the interval, in the corridor, Travis sat down. So I kind of left him on his own. And I come back, he was laid over, sound asleep on this bench. So I took a couple of photographs of him that he wasn't unaware of. And I sent him one later, as a bit of a joke. But I still have one. I still have a picture of him sound asleep because I know what jet lag's like, going the other way from Europe to the States. It suddenly hits you. But so again, we didn't shy away from anything. These cases are in the book. Another interesting case that you don't hear much of now is from Iran in 1976, and this is an Iranian jet fighter pilot. And Iran wasn't the Islamic country that it is now. I think the Shah was still in charge at that point. And of course, they had state-of-the-art aircraft from the United States. And I can't pronounce the pilot's name, so I'm not even going to try. But the pilot was, in his jet, flying away, jet fighter, when he encountered this almost tubular-like UFO with colored lights, and he locked his weapon system on it. And of course, this thing was gone. He actually watched it go and land. And some years later, they tracked down this pilot. He was still alive, and he has gone on the record. And of course, I think it was the U.S. Department of Defense had documentation on the encounter. So we've even used one of the official documents in the book. So when you come to think about UFOs, if I was to say to somebody, you know, name a country that has good UFO accounts from it, Iran would not be top of your list, would it? I mean, let's be honest, it wouldn't be up there. But this is a fascinating case. It really is. And I think it featured also in Leslie Kean's books when she wrote Pilots, Generals, and, you know, whatever, because of, you know, the technology that was in play that day, top of the line jet fighter. And we've brought the book right up to date with the Tic Tac stuff that was released in the New York Times. However, we go back in time as well to Belgium in 1989 and 1990. Huge wave of sightings across Belgium, a lot of which was observed by the gendarmerie, you know, the police. But the people kind of forget about it because it's little old Belgium. But Belgium is part of NATO. You know, it has, or it did have, F-16s. And so eventually the Belgian Air Force sent two F-16s to intercept one of these triangular UFOs. And they got it on their onboard radar in the F-16. Unlike the Department of Defense, the Belgian Air Force didn't hide it away. What they did, they held a press conference and showed the radar recordings on the screen. Here it is, you know. So here we are, you know, all these years later, 30 years later, with the Tic Tac stuff. But there is a precedent, and that was the things in Belgium. So that's in the book as well. It's kind of been forgotten, I think, in all the hoo-ha about the Tic Tacs. The difference being, of course, the Belgian Air Force didn't hide it. They said, here it is, make of it what you will. And the general who was in charge of that has gone on the record, been in the States, you know. So that's featured in the book as well. So we've got a nice blend of encounters, old and new, from around the world. You know, Australia, an encounter from Australia. You don't hear much from down under now.
No.
But so there's a reason for that as well, and that's to emphasize to the young people reading this book, whatever UFOs may or may not be, they are international in scope and don't recognize any international boundaries or borders. So, you know, the debunkers would have you believe that it's only some drunken redneck from Roswell that sees a UFO. Well, that is not true, you know. And it, you know, it does make me laugh when you see comments from people saying, oh, they must have been drunk. Well, you know, hand on heart, when I was a young man, I've been drunk many, many times. So have all my friends, and we never hallucinated anything, you know. It wasn't what I did see, it's what I didn't see. I didn't see the last bus to take me home, you know. I have never met anyone that's been drunk and that's had any kind of hallucination, you know, and I just shake my head and I'm thinking, you're trying to be funny, you know, you're not, you're an idiot. But as simple as that. So, you know, we've got a nice selection of material in the book, and I just hope it you know, if there are young people out there wanting to get involved in the subject, they can realize that there is something that they can get their teeth into. I mean, when I left high school, I had no formal qualifications, no academic training. The school I went to was absolutely hopeless. I mean, it was rubbish. Well, it was. It's just a fact. You know, the area I was brought up in, we were processed to either work in the coal mine or the mill or the factory.
Oh, yeah.
My father worked down the coal mine all his life, and I'm proud to say that. I went to work in a factory. No idea what I wanted to do with my life, but I had something that took me out of that realm. Maybe not permanently, but it was UFOs, and the UFO subject, you know, took me to places where I could never have dreamed of, you know, and to be lecturing in front of young people of my age was a great privilege. I've even lectured in a prison, although I wasn't an inmate; it was an invitation, I can assure you, you know. So, and I've said this to the young people: whatever it is you're interested in, if you really want to get your teeth into it, you know, the sky's the limit. It really is. And of course, you are the next generation, and you know, and good luck.
What decade did you decide to start the book off in?
I would say about 10 10 or 12 years ago, if not further. So not this decade, the one before. The reason I know it is because in the original draft, I said things like, and Betty Hill is still alive today. Of course, Betty is no longer alive, you know, and that slipped through into one of the bits of publication, and it was, somebody pointed it out to me. No, she's not. No, sadly, she's not. I never met Betty, but I did correspond with her on a couple of occasions. So it went through one draft, if you like, and then it was just left. I kind of did an outline of it. I wrote a few cases, printed them out, and then it was set to one side and literally forgotten about. Because the original format of a lot of this stuff wasn't on Microsoft Word, it was on something else. I don't know what. But I managed to transfer some of it and find it. Similarly, back in 1999, I took very ill. I had a near fatal heart attack.
Oh my!
So as part of my rehabilitation, because I couldn't work and so on, I started to write a book. And the book at that point was about my involvement in something that I'm going to stop talking about, but it was the Alien Autopsy film.
Okay.
And I managed to write 3 chapters very slowly. Whilst I was physically weak, I could still shuffle to the keyboard and write a bit. And then I forgot all about it. Years later, when I finally come to write my full work on the Alien Autopsy, I found it on a floppy disk. Believe it or not, remember the little floppy disk?
Yes.
And I couldn't play it, so I had to buy. And I found I found a pack of floppy disks, so I had to buy a little reader that you plug into your USB to read them. And it was amazing. I'd written the Alien Autopsy book, this time now complete, and it was amazing how those first 3 chapters were almost identical. They hadn't changed down the years, So this wasn't the only project that got resurrected in lockdown, but introducing UFOs, was finally resurrected and completed, and hopefully it will serve its purpose.
Awesome.
Do you guys plan on collaborating again for another book?
I have actually. I'm urging Philip to do one based on the old alien encounters, but Philip is the boss, so he decides that. But I think it would be interesting to have one based on. He's done the one. I mean, there are alien encounters in the book, in Philip's book, but I think it would be nice to do one based on, like the old cases. That I'll tell you why, because there was one that interested me when I was younger. After when it was becoming a bit more open, I'll just say that lightly, open. There was I read something about the Kelly Hopkinsville encounter with the goblins. And I remembered seeing a piece of artwork by a brilliant artist of them on the sheds, the goblins in the farmhouse, and the boys with, well, not boys, the men, the sons with their shotguns. And that always intrigued me, the Kelly Hopkinsville encounter. That's so it's like Philip's first book, which is, I think, beautiful. Especially, it's the sort of thing, as I said, I would love to have had as a kid, because as I said, the volumes were too big for its right, or the books were for adults, and there were very few and far between. And also the magazines, which were just absolutely phenomenally huge. I mean, but this one, it centers on the most unique cases as well as the most famous. So I think it would be nice, I mean, as Philip is the boss of it, he would decide, but it would be nice to do one based on the close encounters as to accompany the aliens sometime in the future. And I would be more than happy to illustrate that one as well. Yeah.
It would be nice to make this the first of a little series.
Yeah.
Yes.
And introducing UFOs that, under that title, we could put whatever we liked in it, really, any kind of encounter. So maybe next, it won't be next year, but maybe next would be introducing alien encounters or introducing close encounters. And rather than have it like an umbrella, as Ronald has just been saying, stick to the encounters with what we call up close and personal, high strangeness. And well, this is not a plug, but one of the other books I've written during lockdown is something else that I'd had on the back burner, and it was a book on UFO landings, but landings again only in the UK, nowhere else. Okay. That'll be out at some point next year, because we're actually halfway through making a documentary to go with it. But the documentary has been paused because of the COVID situation. But it will be finished. But the book is done. I mean, when we talk about high strangeness, some of the encounters in there are extremely bizarre. And I mean, you're thinking, should I put this in the book? It is so strange. You think, but no, in it goes. So yes, it would be nice to follow this up at some point with maybe another couple of books, as companions to it. But thanks to Ronald and his brother Philip, I'll be publishing their own individual books next year, plus a whole boatload of others from other authors. So me finding time to sit down and write another, certainly next year, I think is out of the window because we've got so many other things, on the go at Flying Disc Press. It's an idea. It is something that I hoped we would be able to do. I'm not saying it will happen, but it's not beyond a possibility, shall we say?
That's good.
In your experience, when you have an example like you brought up before with Belgium coming out and having a public press conference and showing the radar and all that, but they're part of NATO. I've always been curious to know what kind of friction something like that would cause behind the scenes, the type of discussions that probably nobody would ever see going on behind the scenes. And, does it make Belgium look like the redheaded stepchild? Now they're treated like the outcast of NATO because they went public, and where does that leave other countries who are very secretive, like United States or whatever? How do they react to that?
I don't think you would notice anything in public, have you said, behind the scenes. What it may do is see a lack of cooperation between certain individual countries. Okay. For example, as you're aware, we have what's called Brexit now. We're leaving the European Union, and there is a worry, nothing to do with UFOs, but there is a worry that the intelligence information that we currently share with our counterparts across Europe will be not as good as it should be. That they won't perhaps share information on suspected terrorists or, international police warrants, arrest warrants for known criminals, because we're no longer part of their gang. We've left.
Yeah.
So, and that was always a worry. It's not. It's public. Those fears have been made public, and that could be the same with a subject like this. You wouldn't probably hear it in a public discussion behind the scenes saying, as we know, the Department of Defense kept their UFO study group secret for however many years before Mr. Elizondo stepped out of the shadows, and then hence it went public. But Belgium didn't have a UFO study, as far as we're aware. They just sent the Air Force, and then this is what we found. Yeah. And, politically or militarily, they didn't suffer any consequences. But if you've got a different system and a different mindset, you might say to the man in charge, don't share anything with them, because you know what's going to happen. Next thing you'll know, they'll have it on the television. They'll be holding a press conference about it. What was interesting about the Belgium sightings is they contacted the Americans and said, "Have you got anything flying around up here that we should be aware of?" And they said, "No, it's not. Whatever it is there, it's nothing to do with us." But so there was no pressure exerted on Belgium because they were, part of NATO and still are, and they said, "Okay, here's what we have. Make of it what you will." And but like I say, what may have happened behind the scenes, who knows? So it could have ramifications, yes. So you have to weigh that up. You have to weigh that up, not just in the UFO circles, but in politics like we are doing now with us leaving the European Union. There will be certain things that will happen, but will behind the scenes. They'll be in the corridors of power. And we won't find out about them until, some minister speaks or, has a loose tongue or has a fall out with somebody, or the documents are released under the Freedom of Information Act or something of that nature, So we shall see.
What was that most recent post on Facebook? The Israeli?
Yeah, the thing about the ex-Israeli space defense minister is that he's an ex. So this is not an official government statement. I'll give you an example here. Back in the 1980s, there was a gentleman who used to come to my house. A local guy, he used to run a local farm. He went to the bookies, and he put a bet that UFOs would be proven to be real. Mm-hmm. And when I say a bet, I don't mean $10. I mean a lot of money. Because he kept going back and topping it up. He'd read another UFO book, and then he'd be off to the bookies to put another lump of money on. In 1983, in a national newspaper here called the News of the World, front page said UFOs are real, and that's official. And it was the first splurge about the Rendlesham Forest incidents. And it featured Colonel Holt's famous memo. So this chap took that newspaper into the bookies. There you go, give us me money. And they said, we can only pay out if it's an official announcement from the United States president, the United Nations. I don't know, we might even say the Vatican, we might even accept that. So this is an it's not an official, statement from the head of a country, the premier, the prime minister or whatever. It's just his opinion. And unless he's got anything to support what he's saying, it's just another statement. Yeah. There are others like him, and the pro-UFO lobby will jump on that and say, here you go, Others will take a more perhaps skeptical look at it and say, well, it is just his opinion. If I worked for the Ministry of Defence and said I think X, well, it's just me. That's not official policy. So
I actually did some research and I did not find no book or no article related to that statement anywhere. Past 3 days, nothing.
Yeah.
It's very perplexing that he should come out with something like that. I mean, when I saw it myself, first of all, I just didn't believe him. I'm sorry, something told me there's something wrong here. They might be aware. We are not saying that they don't exist. They do exist. But when he was pressing on to say they're friendly and we're not ready for them, I thought, no, this is really, really bizarre.
Uh-huh.
Yep. Well, one of the big cases, and it's coming out now, there's going to be a History Channel 3-part special on Roswell.
Okay.
And it's called First Witness to Roswell or something along those lines. And it's looking at Major Marcel, the first military man on site. And I've been fortunate enough to once visit Roswell and be out in the desert to the crash site and the Foster Ranch and so on. The only thing that really puzzles me, let's assume for sake of argument that whatever crashed at Roswell was not of this earth. Let's just, there would have, it's a bit like when you see the movie Independence Day. Surely there would have been a whole raft of scientists working on it. Not necessarily from around the world, but a whole team of scientists. This was perhaps first contact. And of course, what those scientists would have left behind is a trail of paperwork in its zillions. But none of that exists. There is nothing of any substance. And that so it's not a question of what do we have to prove that Roswell happened. It's a question of what is missing and what should be there somewhere. And it doesn't mean it's not there. It could mean we just haven't found it. But there should have been thousands of people working on it in some form or another. You think about all the different sciences that would have had to be involved. From linguistics to science to, metallurgists, physicists. I mean, if you think about the atom bomb, they built their own town. They built their own town, to make the atom bomb. Surely they've had something of equal of that if Roswell was a crash. I'm not saying it isn't. I'm just saying it just gives me I don't know. I think there's something missing. And that always bothers me. It's not always what we've got, it's what we haven't got.
So in your opinion, why do you think there's so much that's missing, that's not there, that should be there?
Well, the way I look at Roswell, if you take it in the time period it happened, 1947, the Cold War was just getting started, really. And again, if we say this was a crash of a vehicle from another world, then the propaganda that the US could have got out of it would have been out of this world. Not only have aliens come to Earth, but they've landed on American soil. Sadly, there was an accident, but nonetheless, they came to America, not to Russia, but to America. Can you imagine? I mean, if the president, what he could have, they could have begun. Well, we've got nukes, but guess what? These guys brought us. You mess with us, boy, and you're really going to get it. And of course, if this was an ET vehicle, you wouldn't be able to say you're lying, would you? Because you wouldn't know. And of course, none of that happened. What bothers me, another little thing about Roswell, is that it happened. Something crashed. We all know something came to Earth. Everybody admits that. Even the skeptics will tell you that. But according to the people who believe it was of extraterrestrial origin, it was covered up almost immediately.
Mm-hmm.
What was it that they could identify, and then not only identify, but realize that they have to put a cover up, not just then, but keep that cover up going to this very day?
Exactly.
What could it be? If you look at the movie that was based on Roswell, which is Hangar 18, they got the flying saucer and took it into the hangar and studied it for a number of days before they finally figured out what it was. But in reality, at Roswell, the press release went out, the armies found the bits of a flying disc, and then next day, same newspaper, sorry, it's all a weather balloon.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So something happened very quickly. How would, if it was truly not of this earth, how would you know that? How would you be able to identify that? And how would you be able to figure out that this posed some kind of threat, in inverted commas, that you had to cover it up? I don't know.
It does indicate some kind of a long-standing agreement of some type behind the scenes.
It could well do. All I'm saying is, what is it? And when we talk about communicating with other races, well, the next most intelligent species on Earth is a dolphin, and that's dumber than us, and we can't communicate with that. We can teach you to catch a fish and jump up in the air, but we can't ask it if it's having a nice day, can we? So we can't converse with a species here on Earth. How would we do it with something that's not of this Earth?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It's just little things that to me, the questions that still need to be answered. But sadly, all of those that were actually first-hand witnesses to Roswell are all now deceased.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
So what I've said to a number of researchers is that what you're looking for now is the paper trail, is things left in someone's attic or their basement or their garage. For example, in the new series of this Roswell, they've actually got I believe it's a journal of the late Major Marcel. So it's his own handwriting. Mm-hmm. And so what this journal's going to say, I don't know. We'll find out in the series. But here's a little thing to round things off with you. And Ronald knows this gentleman. Over this last couple of years, I've worked with a gentleman by the name of Calvin Parker, who was involved at the Pascagoula abduction in October the 11th, 1973. It's a long story, but a fascinating one. Anyway, moving forward in time, I think it was around about 1984, Calvin was in Iowa working in the oil industry. And he was friendly with the local lady in the local store, you know, and she knew who he was, you know, the alien abduction guy. So she says to him one day, will you come and have a chat with this old gentleman for me? Calvin, being a, you know, hospitable guy, said, yeah, no problem. He just thought it was some lonely old man. So she drove him out to this house. She walked straight in, so he thought, well, she must know him. And she invited Calvin in, and in he goes. Bearing in mind, although Calvin was an abductee and had been involved in a very fascinating incident, he wasn't interested in the subject at all. So he starts talking to this old boy, and he starts telling him all about Roswell. Calvin has no idea what he's talking about or who he is. He was Major Marcel Sr.
Oh.
So Calvin went and phoned his colleague, his friend, Charles Hickson, who was involved in the abduction with him, because Charlie had taken an interest in the subject. And he said, have you heard of this before, this Roswell? And this, yes. He said, yeah. So Calvin had another meeting with this old chap, and again, he told him more about Roswell. Then on the third occasion, he went to his house. He's talking with the old man, and he says, I'll tell you what. He said, I actually kept 3 pieces of the UFO material.
Right.
And they're in my water heater. All you got to do is screw the lid off. So Calvin went looking for a screwdriver, and there was a knock on the door, and it was one of the neighbors came. So Calvin, again being a gentleman, said, I'll leave you to talk to your neighbor. I'll see you later. No problem. That night, Calvin got called offshore to work on the oil rigs out at sea and was gone for 3 or 4 months. By the time he came back, Marcel had passed away. And that story is going to be in this new series.
And I'm sure whatever was in that water heater is gone, right?
Well, who knows? The house is still there.
I've always been curious to know what happened to the artifact he saved.
Well,
and,
Calvin told me the story on one condition. He says, I don't want it going public. I said, well, why don't you want it going public? He said, well, I know Mr. Marcel had a family. So then I explained to him that Marcel Jr. had also passed away. Then Calvin was happy to tell the story. What he didn't want was the press to descend on Marcel Jr. He had no idea that Jesse Marcel Jr. had dealt with the press and had written his own book and had done public speaking, because Calvin's not interested in the subject. He just didn't want them to be pestered by a story that that he was telling. So once I explained the situation to him, he told the story, and he has been filmed to go in this History Channel series. So it will be interesting, because what we've said is everybody who was there is now passed away. So if there is anything to be found, it's going to be in a basement, in somebody's old, attic, filing cabinet. Who knows? That's the next generation to take up the torch and look for those artifacts. Maybe they'll have more success than we have.
Hopefully.
I had actually met Jesse Marcel Jr. once, back in 2007. The 50th anniversary or 60th anniversary celebration going on at that time in Roswell, and he was there.
So was I.
I may have met you and didn't realize it at the time.
Yeah, I was better looking then than I am now.
What about that guy that we know? I forgot his name. He has that piece of fuselage, supposedly. The older gentleman, I can't remember his name.
Oh yes, he's here in New Mexico. I have to go look his name again, but
we met him, his wife. I held the piece.
Yes. There's a gentleman here who deals with an associated UFO crash and has been researching it for many years alongside Roswell.
Mm-hmm.
And it was only so many miles away from it. It was like a second crash that nobody bothered to talk about too much.
But all of his information is at that Roswell Museum when we went to go see it.
His stuff is in there too, the artifacts. Yeah.
Well, I'll be publishing a book next year by Don Schmidt and Tom Carey.
Okay.
That's called Touched by Roswell.
Okay.
So I'll not say any more about the contents, because I've only got the basic details, and I don't want to say something and then they change what eventually comes out. So that'll be out next year as well.
Interesting.
So this new book that we've been talking about today, it's on Flying Disc Press, right?
You can go to Flying Disc Press, or you can just go to Amazon.
Amazon,
You buy it in paperback, or you can download it to your Kindle, to your laptop, your cell phone, you name it. And of course, on a digital image, everything's in full color. Mm-hmm. But if you're old school and you prefer a book to lie in bed at night, put them, take them, rise the cell phone from your hand, for an hour, and have a read. It is there, But not only that, if you're a parent and you've got a son or a daughter who's interested in this subject, slip that under their pillow or smack them round the head with it one night and say, "Here you go, you've nattered me long enough. Have a read of that."
Have you guys been? I know you just came out with it November 1st, right?
Yes.
So, have you been targeting certain genres or industries like high schools or parents groups?
No, it's different here because we're still in lockdown, so there's not a lot we can do as far as that is concerned. That's why I think, as far as this is concerned, we're not looking to sell 1 million books overnight, because we're in a very different situation than we were 12 months ago. Mm-hmm. This is going to be left, and it's going to be available for quite some time. So, it might be for a high student next year. They're coming up to graduation or whatever and wanting to get interested in something. So it's going to be around for a while, hopefully. And it's very different. The rules and regulations that we have here on schooling, I think, is quite different to the US. So it will be down mainly to the parents and the young people themselves to get a hold of this book, rather than the schools and colleges. Although there will be a copy going to my old high school. Revenge is sweet. They told me I'd never amount to anything, and so, there won't be any wires or anything sticking out of the bottom. It'll just be the book that goes and nothing else. And a nice letter, of course. I wasn't one of their outstanding students. They'll have no idea who I am when I send it. But I said, put this in your library, But that's on my list of things to do.
I have a couple of teachers like that from grade school and high school who I'd like to send my books to. And
when I was at high school, I left high school in 1974. We were still allowed to be hit. So we used to get regularly hit around the head and punched and kicked and caned. You still got the cane from the headmaster.
Oh, boy.
So, yeah. It was still there. And the school was hopeless anyway. So, it didn't make any difference how smart you was. It didn't make, the school was rubbish. But that was just a different time. I'm not blaming anyone. It's just the way it was. I have no regrets. And so introducing UFOs, if you're interested and you're of that age group, maybe treat yourself. I'm sure you've got $20. I'm sure you can get $20 from somewhere.
Yes. And having worked in education for 20 years, it's not that easy to just go to a school and say, here, especially here in the state, here's a new book for your library. You have to go through the state. The state has regulations on what books are allowed in schools. And their PTA, forget it. So you're not even going to get near a PTA. Nobody's going to take a book that has anything that's UFO in it in the public education system and say, sure, we'll put that in our library.
Yeah.
It's not that easy.
Mm.
I wish it was, but it's not that easy.
Well, so it's down to the individuals themselves, and
Yes.
maybe Ronald and I, by the time it's sold 1 million copies, we'll have the next one in the series out. How's that?
I'm looking forward to that, Philip. Looking forward to that one. Yeah.
We only have about a half an hour left.
Well, I was going to say, in that half hour, if you guys, I was curious to know, what kind of feedback have you received so far on the book? Has anybody come back to you and said, outstanding idea, or, what
the hell is this rubbish?
Yeah, what is going on?
Yeah, that was my wife that said that.
Well, I must say that I'm very honoured about the illustrations, the comments made on them, and it is actually quite a beautiful book. I actually didn't, until I got Philip sent me some copies of it, I didn't realize how big it was. It's quite a nice sized book. You know, it's, I mean, the books that we're quite used to are like the standard pocket size one, paperbacks, but this is quite a nice sized book. And the photographs in it as well, very interesting to see the photographs where you have to make up your mind if some are fake or some are not, which I think is great. That's the Sherlock Holmes element coming in. You know, you make up your own mind, as Philip said. You know, but it's something even my grandfather would have liked to have read, because my grandfather was, as I said, open-minded. He was like us, analytical to a degree. He had no nonsense, but he would have read that. He would have devoured it. And I can hear him saying, you know, that's not bad. That's not a bad book, because anything he read was never bad. You know, that's not bad. Not bad at all. But he would have loved, that's the sort of thing he would have liked to have had, you know, to read. So yeah, it's a beautifully illustrated as well. And as I said, the Belgian Wave, I did not know about them, but there was a program that was released we used to watch, which I absolutely loved, that wasn't biased. But I think the presenter then was Robert Stack, the wonderful Robert Stack. Unsolved Mysteries.
Yeah. That's one of our favorite shows too. Yes.
Yeah, I absolutely love them. I adored them, and that's when I saw, because I hadn't. You see, there weren't any books out then about it, so we see it on Unsolved Mysteries way back then when Sky had Sky News on. Then you had Cops and Cops 2, and you had Unsolved Mysteries, you know, with Robert Stack. But that's when I was interested me in the triangular ships, and as Philip said, is mentioned in his book, how the authorities were far more open, which is quite a blessing, really, because the reason why it's watertight or they close it down is rather like JFK. You know, the president, John F. Kennedy, the wonderful president who was disgracefully assassinated. You see, Philip said about the paper trail, there must be something about that with him as well. So everything bad or everything unexplainable is put into a can, which they tighten, they seal up, you know, but there must be something, you know, as Philip was saying about paper trail. I agree with him, absolutely. With Roswell, that sadly all the witnesses have passed. I wouldn't have known that unless that was for Philip, because Philip is an authority on the Roswell incident. But there must be a paper trail to all these things, you know. I mean, how do you see if they can keep the president's assassination so quiet? Because let's be honest, we're not going to know. Then they can do anything. They can engineer a smoke screen over UFOs and aliens. They can do anything. Yeah. But as Philip rightly said, someone somewhere must know, you know.
Well, as Ronald will probably confirm, here in the UK we have what's called the Official Secrets Act, and it's all encompassing. And it was originally designed for the First World War. So that's 100 years ago now. Wow. That's how old it is. But it covers literally everything. I used to have a friend of mine who worked in a textile mill, and he was just a manager. He just made cloth, and he says, "I've signed the Official Secrets Act," and I said, "Oh, no way have you signed it. You make cloth, that's all you do." He said, "No, I've signed the Official Secrets Act." I said, "What for?" So we were pulling his leg about all kinds of things. And it turns out it was true, because some of the cloth that he made was eventually used to make military dress uniforms. There was nothing special about this cloth. It wasn't secret ingredients. It was just cloth that they made. So he had to sign the Official Secrets Act.
Huh.
Okay.
So that's how outdated it is. And but then, of course, even though we have now the Freedom of Information Act, we didn't have it up until I think it was 2003. That the somewhere around along that line, there is still that of secrecy. National, and so they can still withhold information if they want to. It's as simple as that. There's always a get-out clause. For example, we're famous in Britain for our monarchy. Everybody knows we've got a queen, but there is in the National Archives here in the UK, there are letters handwritten by Queen Victoria.
Okay, okay.
And it is alleged that they are some kind of love letters to someone she was involved with, which wasn't her husband. I think maybe he'd already passed away at Prince Albert. But they have kept the lid on them. You cannot read them. They would not be released into the public domain. So national security, what has Queen Victoria's love letters got to do with national security?
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely nothing. But of course, it's a way of keeping them out of the public domain. So there's always that get out clause. But when it comes to things like Roswell, there should be a mountain of paperwork somewhere. And I mean, I really mean that, a mountain. And it bothers me that we haven't found it. And we should. But like I said, maybe the next generation will have better luck than we have. They will grown up with a more of a technological eye than we certainly did. I mean, I thought it was amazing when I got a colour television. Well, a colour TV. Whoa, but you can carry a colour television around in your back pocket now, and a computer, and a phone. Exactly. So so maybe they'll have better luck than we have. But case histories are always fascinating. We mentioned, we'll diverge if it's all right from the book for a moment. We worked with Calvin Parker for the last 2 years. On October the 11th, 1973, Calvin was almost 19. His colleague, Charles Hickson, was 42. Charlie was a friend of his dad's. Calvin was getting married, and Charlie worked in a shipyard. So Calvin said, can you get me a job there? I want a steady job. I'm getting married. I want to work 9 till 5. Here, he lived 200 miles away. He said, I've got 3 jobs. I don't know whether I'm coming or going. So Charlie says, yeah. So October the 11th, 1973 was Calvin's first day at work in the shipyard. And he was a welder. So they went through the safety training, and he's welding. Both gentlemen, even though they were from different generations, shared one interest. That was fishing. So as they're driving back that night, Charlie said, do you want to go fishing tonight? So Calvin says, well, I've not brought any tackle with me, no gear. He said, I can borrow some of mine. So off they go. Calvin's driving. They buy some bait on their way. The Pascagoula River is not miles from anywhere. It's right by where everybody lives. And there's a huge, great bridge goes over it, Highway 90, I believe it is. So they find, they're driving in. They pass a car that's parked up with a couple in it having a kiss and a cuddle. Calvin also passes a no entry sign, and he remarks to Charlie, well, it says no entry. He said, don't worry about it. So they start fishing. The first spot there, absolutely attacked by flies. So they move to another spot, which is an old abandoned shipyard. It's an old pier. It's falling apart. So they're on the pier, out in the water, and as they're fishing away, from behind them comes these blue lights. Calvin thinks, I knew we shouldn't have ignored the no entry sign. We're going to spend the night in jail, So he thinks, oh boy. As they turn around, of course, it's not the police. There is this rugby ball, or what you call an American football shaped object, descending. It stopped a couple of feet off the ground. It had 2 lights at one end. And it had this intense blue light. It hurt your eyes. It was that bright. And then an opening appeared, and at the other end, and then these 3 humanoid creatures literally floated out. And I mean floated. They didn't touch the ground. They were, Calvin to this very day calls them big uglies. They had no neck, no eyes, no mouth. They had pointed protrusions out of the side of the head and one out of the front. They had arms, but they had mitten-like or pincer-like hands. The legs were stuck together, so they didn't move their legs. And the whole skin was grey, like an elephant skin, and all wrinkly.
Oh, okay.
So 2 got hold of Charlie, 1 got hold of Calvin, and Calvin says, I was terrified, Philip. And I mean literally terrified. He felt some kind of prick, and he was instantly relaxed. They were taken towards this thing. They were separated as they went on board. Calvin said, I was laid on this table, for want of a better word, but he said, when I'm laid there, I couldn't feel it. No, I couldn't feel it. And this thing came out of the ceiling, about the size of a pack of cards, circled around him as if it was taking pictures or x-rays. He doesn't really know. There was another entity appeared in the corner, which he felt was female. Then this ugly thing got hold of him again. Again, he became scared. So he felt another pinprick, and he was deposited back on the old pier. The next thing he remembers is Charlie shouting at him, "Are you all right, son? Are you all right? You all right, Calvin?" And then this thing went, it's gone. So they had a debate of what to do. Calvin was so scared by it all. He says, "We're not going to tell anybody. They'll think we're nuts." So they start off, he's driving, by the way, and they have a change of heart, or rather Charlie does. He says, "Pulling over here, there's a payphone." They phoned the local airbase first because Charlie used to be in the military. He was a veteran from the Korean War. Kinsella Air Force Base just said, "We don't investigate UFOs anymore. Call the local authorities." So they do. They phoned the police. But it was the sheriff that came out. And they escorted them into town to the sheriff's office, interviewed both gentlemen separately. I didn't believe them. Then they put them in a room together. And what was next to them was a table. And the deputy did something with the table, and off they went. What they didn't know, that he'd set the tape recorder running. And he recorded their conversation. And the deputy and the sheriff, Sheriff Fred Diamond, the deputy was a chap called Glenn Ryder. Thought, "Right, we'll get him now." You know, they go in 5 or 10 minutes later, take this tape out and play it back. And of course, they're not saying we've fooled the police, you know.
Yeah.
They're still terrified. Calvin says, "I need something for my nerves to calm me down. I'll never sleep." He's almost praying. He's almost crying. So they believe them. They release them. They go home. The story gets out the next day, and it was a huge story. Within 2 days, Dr. Alan Hynek is on site. They took a lie. Well, Charlie took a lie detector test. He was hypnotized by Dr. James Harder. And Hynek held a press conference and said, "These guys are the genuine article." Calvin went back home 200 miles away, and within 3 weeks was in the hospital with a nervous breakdown. He didn't want anything to do with the subject. Charlie was a different kettle of fish. He went on television, UFO conferences, you know, that kind of thing. So we jump right forward to 2018. I'd got permission to publish a book that Charlie wrote, Charles Hickson with William Mendez in 1983. It's called UFO Contact at Pascagoula. Charles Hickson was already deceased. But I thought it'd be nice if I could find Calvin and get an up-to-date interview with him. But in the meantime, I published the book. But I was still looking for Calvin, and I managed to track him down. And when I spoke to him on the phone, first of all, he was, you know, very polite, a bit like a politician. He talked to you, but didn't say an awful lot, you know, didn't tell you an awful lot. Unbeknown to me, just a few weeks before this, Calvin had been to a funeral of a friend, and they wrote in the book of condolence, their names are coming out, and people behind him saw his name. They're pointing and winking, you know, the alien guy. And this annoyed Calvin because he thought, first of all, it's disrespectful. But his wife, Waynette, said, "Look, why don't you write a damn book? Why don't you tell everybody?" Bear in mind, Waynette was the girl he was engaged to at the time when all this happened. He hadn't even told her the whole story. So he said, "Yes, darling, I'll do it, darling. Yes, you know, as you do, you know. Yes, I'll pay it in the bathroom next week. Yeah, sure I will, you know." So Calvin just happened to mention to me, "Oh, I'm thinking about writing a book." So I said, "Well, maybe I can help you with that." Hey, presto, we worked together, and the books came out. What is interesting, Calvin did some local publicity, one of the local TV stations. About, you know, a little 7 or 8 minute piece they did, and somebody put it on YouTube. And a young lady underneath it, you know, you can leave the comments, said, "My mother and father were on the opposite side of the river that night, and they too saw the UFO." I'm thinking, hello. Wow. I jumped straight onto her. I found her elsewhere on social media. She gave me her mum and dad's telephone number. They were Mr. and Mrs. Blair, and we spoke to them and interviewed them. And they've been interviewed by my friend and colleague, Dr. Irina Scott in the States. I spoke to them as well. What it was, Mr. Blair was in the fishing industry, and they were on the other side of the river at exactly the same time. He was waiting for a boat that was coming in. It was late, so he was a bit, what we call grumpy. He was a bit annoyed. And they could see the blue lights over the river. Mrs. Blair said it looked like whatever it was lost. Or if it was looking for something, you know. And then their boat came in. She wasn't going on it, just her husband. And as they're walking along the pier, bear in mind it's dark, she says there's this enormous splash in the water next to me. And she says, I look down and there's a grey man in the water.
Holy cow. Okay.
Her husband had gone ahead. She'd got some of his belongings. She literally ran up, threw them on the boat, and then run back, because she'd got to go back to the car. And then, of course, the next day she sees Calvin and Charlie's account on the local news and so on. Her husband says, don't tell anybody. They'll think we're lunatics. So they told us both of this. You know, they both said, yeah, we saw the blue lights. About a year later, Mr. Blair took ill. And he was literally in hospital when I spoke to him on the telephone. And he said, I got to tell you, Philip, I also saw, this is his word, I saw the humanoid as well that night. It came up out of the water, went back across the water, and we saw the damn thing take off. Wow. And then he went on to tell his wife, and she'd said this, Mrs. Blair said this right at the beginning. She said, I often wondered if the same thing hadn't happened to me and my husband that happened to Charlie and Calvin.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Mr. Blair said it did. That they'd had a missing time stroke encounter.
Oh, boy, okay.
Sadly, he passed away, but he wanted to tell us, he knew how seriously ill he was, so he wanted to get the facts on the record before anything happened, and he did. And that all came from Calvin doing that little local news item for a few minutes. Calvin was also then did a book signing in Pascagoula. And an elderly guy with white hair came up and said, can I have a book? Yeah, sign it for me, please, Mr. Parker. Yeah. And he said, oh, by the way, I saw the UFO that night as well. And off he went. And he's gone. However, somebody was taking photographs at the time, and they actually took a photograph of this man at the table with Calvin. So I put that on social media, and one of his relatives recognized it, said, I'll speak to him, see if he'll have a chat with you. And he did. And his name is called Mr. Lewis Lee. And he works in one of the shipyards on the river. He was working that night, and he says, Philip, he says, the cab, he was a crane driver. He says, my cab was about 10 or 12 feet off the ground. And he says, as soon as I got in it, I can't do a Mississippi accent, so please excuse me. I have trouble speaking English coming from the north of England, never mind anything else, you know. He said, it's the darndest thing I've ever seen. And he watched it for about this big blue thing. And he says, the only reason I took my eyes off it is because I had a load on the end of my crane. And my friends down below shouting, watch what you're doing, you know. He didn't use those words exactly, but I'm sure you can get an idea. So he says, I dealt with the load on my crane, and when I turned back, it had gone. So I said, did you ever tell anybody? He said, well, I told my family. I never kept it a secret, but nobody else ever asked me about it. Mm-hmm. And so it just gives you an example. I mean, these are, Ronald knows the story. These are a number of eyewitnesses that have continued to come forward. And one of the criticisms of the case, for example, was, well, there's the bridge. The bridge goes over the river. There's all the traffic. How come nobody on the bridge saw it? Well, it did. There was a gentleman that's got on the record, again, interviewed by my colleague, Dr. Irina Scott. He says, that night in question, I'm driving across that bridge with my wife on the other side. You guys drive, you have your steering wheel on a funny side, don't you? You know?
Yes.
And he said, I was looking down at this thing. He said, I thought it was an airplane that was going to crash. It was so low.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And he said, my wife couldn't see it because I was blocking her view of it, because I'm looking down on it. And then, of course, next day, he again sees the news item about Charlie and Calvin. He went to visit his aunt, who lived down by the river. And he said, before I could open my mouth, she said, you'll never believe what I saw last night. And he hadn't said anything. And his aunt saw it. I mean, these are just a number of them. So what I'm saying, this happened in 1973. So, I left high school in 1974. And I thought we had a good chance, because it's not out of the way, like the debunkers would have you believe. It's not just rednecks in Roswell that see these things. Not. This is right by the highway, In 1993, Calvin had another missing time episode, again while out fishing, but this time on his own boat, on his own. Wasn't on the pier this time. So a friend persuaded him to go and see the late Bud Hopkins. Bud Hopkins was at a conference in Florida, so they drove down unannounced and asked Bud, for a meeting. He did, and Bud hypnotized Calvin. And I have that hypnosis tape, and the transcript is in Calvin's second book. What is interesting, he also took him back to the 1973 episode, and as I told you, when Calvin was driving up to it, they passed a car that was parked. Now, consciously, Calvin could remember the make, the model, and the color of that car. But it was only when he was under hypnosis that he could read the number plate.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
So what he did, after he came out of hypnosis, he'd got the number plate. He hired a private detective to try and find the owners of that particular car back on October the 11th, 1973. And he did. And it was a man and a woman. They were a courting couple. The man had passed away, but the lady had just gone into a nursing home, but she still had all her faculties about her. Calvin tracked her down, and she agreed to speak to him on one condition, and that was, you don't release my name. So Calvin spoke to her, and she said, because Calvin said, well, when this thing's coming down, we could see the car driving off. It was almost like one of those movie moments, when somebody's face appears at the back window and their eyes lock, He said it was just like that. I could see her face. And this was the lady in the nursing home. And she said, we saw the damn thing take off and we were gone. We couldn't get out of there fast enough. So what I'm saying is, when it comes to all these other classic cases, there's no reason why the next generation shouldn't be able to. It's not just the new cases. They can find information about some of the older cases, the classic cases, because not everybody's dead. Everyone at Roswell is now deceased. So we're now looking for artifacts from that, paperwork, documents, photographs, whatever. But with other cases that, like Calvin's, there's people still around. I mean, these are just a few of the witnesses that I'm telling you about. And that all came about because Calvin decided to write the book, and he did some local publicity. Most of these people still live in and around the area. And, we haven't necessarily sought them out. They've come forward, and all but one has allowed us to use their real identity, their real names. They have nothing to hide. And so the next generation, once they've read Introducing UFOs, of course, have been inspired by Ronald's amazing artwork, they can get their teeth into it because they've got tools that they can use that we can only dream of. Right. What, artificial intelligence is growing, the internet is still growing. Yeah. What will be around the corner when we're dead and gone, who knows? So that just gives you some idea of what somebody with enough determination can actually find out about a case that was dead. The Pascagoula case was dead. Nobody had heard of it. It was gone. But now, Calvin's come forward. We have a documentary offer on the table. There is a screenplay being written about his encounters, so hopefully that'll eventually get made into a movie, and so on. And so if you sat at high school now and think, well, there's nothing happens in my neighborhood, well, maybe there isn't, but maybe something happened 10 years ago or 20 years ago that you can still get your teeth into.
I have to show you something. Talk about synchronicity. This book from 1978 has it in there.
Pascagoula, there you go.
Yep.
There you go.
The illustration of the two of them. So
yeah.
And that's it. So
yeah, there you go.
That's the beings flying down that were looking pretty strange.
Yeah.
Ronald, although we haven't used them in this book, Ronald is Ronald has done some illustrations based on those creatures, and it was quite difficult, wasn't it, Ron?
Yes, I'm interested. I believe. I mean, Calvin evidently knows. He saw them firsthand, but I get the impression they were robots. I mean, we had Calvin on a show one time, and I think he was warming to the idea, or he probably assumed they might have been mechanical, but they certainly strike me as not only being mechanical, but also aquatic. I mean, imagine my surprise. I mean, this would never have come out unless it was for Calvin and Philip Mantle. I would never have known it. But as he said, it opened a whole can of worms, which is amazing, because all these people saw it and them. But the creatures, when I was illustrating them, I gave them, I hope, an aquatic feel, because when they described the Blairs having seen them in the water, I certainly thought, well, and even Philip, my brother Philip, said it's as if they're reptilian type aquatic. So I tell you what, I can't wait. If this is made into a movie, it will be a fantastic movie, because people will learn something, and they were so different. And I just feel that they were absolutely quite horrifying. I mean, the poor men went through quite a traumatic time, but thanks to Philip, I mean, this has come out now.
Yeah.
What is really interesting, I know time's just about up, but one of the things I asked Calvin right from day one was, have you got any paperwork, any documents, photographs? Well, he was in Hurricane Katrina, so anything he had was gone.
Oh no!
Even photographs of his daughter when she was a baby, and gone. So I set about contacting people, saying, "Look, I'm working with Calvin Parker, Pascagoula. Have you got anything?" I mean, I just put it out all over. The Center for UFO Studies, founded by Dr. Hynek, of course, sent me their file on it, and it's a PDF file, and it's mostly newspaper cuttings. But I'm still grateful for that. But right in the middle of all these newspaper cuttings. And this is really, I find really fascinating. It's a one-page type-written document, so it's written on the old-fashioned typewriter, and you can tell that because they've gone over the date, got the date wrong, and they've gone back and typed over it. I remember doing that myself, millions of times. And it's a medical exam of both Charlie and Calvin.
Okay.
And they said we examined them from head to toe, apart from their private parts, and on both men we found, in inverted commas, puncture wounds.
Oh, okay.
Now, bearing in mind, Calvin said he felt this prick when this creature got hold of him, and it calmed him down. And then when he's coming back off this thing, if the same thing happened, again. So is that where these puncture wounds? Is that the puncture wounds we're talking about?
Right.
Now, I asked Calvin, I said, who examined you? And he said it was Dr. James Harder. He wasn't a medical examiner. He was a physiologist or some such thing. But nonetheless, he asked us to strip off, and he gave us the once over. So we're assuming this is written by James Harder, no longer with us, of course. But like I'm saying, for the next generation, I did this just by putting out a blanket request. Surely there must be other. It is the one thing we can't find. It is alleged that this was Dr. Hynek's favorite case, and that he had his own file on it. Not that there was anything secret in the file or anything like that. It's one of those files that he used to take home with him. And of course, when he passed away, that file has disappeared. It's been kind of confirmed by his son, Paul Hynek. Paul and what I've got, and Calvin are friends. So maybe the next generation, maybe I'll beat them to it, but maybe the next generation might be able to find that file somewhere. You know, it shows what can be done with enough determination.
Well, this younger generation is also much more open to it.
Yeah.
The whole thing.
Yeah. And they've got technology that we didn't have. They will have technology that's coming that we can only imagine that will enable them to look at the UFO subject in a different way.
Yes.
You know,
I don't think they're encumbered by preconceived notions of superstition or religious belief or anything like that. They have a much more open opportunity to embrace it and not be hindered by any sense of fear or, you know, like I said, preconceived notions of what it might be.
Yeah.
And because you figure, just look at the medical industry. It wasn't until the mid 20th century when the medical industry actually thought it was okay to operate on the heart, because up to that point there was that ridiculous idea that the heart and the brain belongs to God. We don't touch that.
Yeah.
You know, so
Dr. Christian Barnard in South Africa, first doctor to do a heart transplant. It's amazing, but it's not routine now. But you don't really hear about somebody having a heart transplant anymore, do you? It's taken as the done thing.
Yeah. So, but we're coming to the end here, and we
at the end.
wanted to give you shameless plug time to tell everybody where they can find you,
Where they can find the books.
where they can find the books,
I mean,
contact you.
they can find all our books at flyingdiscpress.com, and that's Disc spelt with a K, or they can just go on Amazon, and they're all there. So you'll get them all in paperback. Most of them are also in Kindle as well. And keep an eye out for the Kinsella twins next year. First up will be Philip Kinsella. So that's Ronald's other half, literally his other half. You know?
That's if I'm not sitting in for him.
Indeed. It could be Philip that's written both of them. It could be Ronald that's written both of them. Who knows? And then, of course, in March of next year, we'll have a book by Ronald as well. Plus many more throughout the year. So there will be new things coming. So there's something for everyone. There's books there from UFO researchers from many different parts of the world, as well as the United States and the UK. There are our books, and of course, there's Introducing UFOs. If you're in that age group and it's something that's your passion, like it was for me, maybe treat yourself to a copy.
Awesome.
Makes me want to send you all the copies of the pictures that I have from my experiences.
Oh yeah. I think you'd enjoy seeing that.
That would be interesting. Yes, thank you. That would be fascinating.
Okay.
I'll send it to both of you.
Thank you, Linda.
How should people contact you directly? Both of you.
Yeah, we're both on Facebook.
Okay.
And again, from flyingdiscpress.com, there's my email on there. They can just send me a message. But I'm not invisible. I'm all over the place. So I'm easy enough to find, you know. Even the wife can find me. So, you know.
Well, it was a pleasure to finally get to speak to you instead of just on Facebook back and forth. Thank you so much for spending your time with us today.
No, our pleasure, and good luck with all your new projects. They sound really fascinating, and we wish you well with them. We really do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Linda and Richard. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you. It's been a pleasure to be on your show. Thank you so much for having us. And as Philip said, good luck with your new ventures. I wish you all the best.
And thank you, Mr. Kinsella, for calling me vintage. I feel like I know what I know.
I'm going to get my hand slapped now, I tell you.
It's all right because my wife's older than me, so she's a different vintage altogether, Ronald.
Anyway,
okay, guys. Well, good night and God bless to everyone.
Yes. Thank you so much, guys.
Bye-bye,
Thank
everybody.
you for a really nice 9-month wild ride.
I know. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye, Philip.